Hello everyone, my name is Eric Teacher, and today we are going to be talking about the wild robot. And specifically, what we are going to talk about is exploring nature, humanity, and AI. So for the wild robot, nature, humanity, and AI are what we call themes. Themes are like the overall ideas that are shown in things like books or movies or really anything that has a story. So, the first thing we need to talk about is what do we mean when we say humanity? When we say nature? When we say technology? Like, what specifically are we talking about? So, when we're talking about humanity, we are talking about things of humans, things of people. So humanity can mean part of our society. Humanity can mean how humans should or would react in situations. It is about the things that make us human and different from other things that act and react like animals, or in this case, like robots. Then on the other part, it's about AI, it's about technology. And when we're talking about technology, in this case, we're talking about robotics. We're talking about the robot's ability to think and act like a human. And so this book really explores how a robot might act the same, but also maybe different. It is also about nature. And what's really interesting about this is that it's not only about, as my slide says here, the humanity's impact, people's impact on nature. It is about our impact on nature through our technology. For the wild robot, it is very specific about through our making of Roz as a robot and her impact on nature itself. But this is to help us look at we as people, when we create new technology, it has an impact on the environment, whether it's pollution, whether it is saving extinct or almost extinct animals, endangered animals. We have consequences to technology. And these consequences give us extra responsibilities to nature, as we see that Roz sees that she has additional responsibilities when she becomes closer to nature, as technology connecting to nature. And when we talk about nature in this book, we are talking about the natural world, the world of the animal kingdom and plants, the world that sort of exists outside of humans, that we find we do have an influence on. But it's through technology, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as you can see here, I also have that it is about AI's potential. Just like people, AI has the potential to help nature and the environment or to harm it. And we get to find through Roz whether AI itself, as it becomes able to think for itself, feels that same about having a responsibility to nature and taking care of it or controlling it. Oh, what's that? You want to know why we're reading The Wild Robot? Because there's thousands of other books out there too. We are reading The Wild Robot because of its focus on robotics and nature, and how these two things seem like they're complete opposites. Not to mention, as I have here on this slide, in understanding AI is everywhere. It seems like AI might have started with people talking about ChatGPT, and then suddenly it's on our phones, it's on everybody's computers. We are using it to help us study, to help us work, to help us do so many things that it is going to be such an important part of our future. And so, because of that, we should look at stories that try to tell us something about AI and robotics and give us some lessons that maybe we can learn from it. Looking at Roz, we can also see something altogether human. The Wild Robot story helps us to understand who we are as humans by helping us see maybe what is different from humans and robots. Because when we look at, well, that's not something a person would do or a person could do, it helps us learn more about ourselves and how we could do that or how we would react in this situation. Specifically, just looking at the part where Roz is able to learn and understand the animals in her environment, we can see that she is way beyond what a person could do. If a person suddenly woke up and found themselves in the middle of nature, we could maybe look at behaviors and guess at what the animals are thinking, but Roz is able to develop language with them, and as such can make an even closer connection than what people can. And that tells us about our limitations, but also how we need to work harder to understand nature and our environments, and how AI can help us understand it even better. And that actually goes a little bit into my next point here. So it's about defining or redefining our relationship with nature. So we have had different relationships with nature as history has gone on. Nature might have appeared as sort of a force that we had to fight, a force that we needed to survive. And then it became this force that we could live with, that we sort of lived in harmony with, that we used for farming and raising animals. And now that technology has evolved even further, our relationship with nature has become different. And something we should look at is our relationship with nature now, because we have such great technology, to control it? Or is our relationship to nature one where we need to use it like it's this resource that is able to give us things like food and water, and that is ours to manipulate, it is ours to use to help humanity grow bigger and stronger? So yeah, think about whether we are protectors of nature and the environment, or think about if we are destined to sort of control nature. Will we one day be able to control the tides, to control the weather, be able to predict every small thing that happens on the earth? Because there's a lot unknown out there right now, and AI might help us to figure out lots of that unknown. All right, so let's move on to our next topic. And before I go on, oh, yes? Oh, you're confused about what exactly is nature? Well, that's easy enough. We did talk about it a little bit earlier, but let's look. Nature is living things. We can think of nature when we're talking about it, or writing about it in this case. It's the living things, plants, trees, animals, the things that behave, but nature is more than that, right? It's not just when we're talking about humanity, it's only humans, because that's also more than humanity, right? But nature is a physical environment as well. It is the land If the land, is mountainous or hilly, or if the land dips down, it is the landscape, it is the rivers, the oceans, the shape of the earth. That is also a part of nature. And then nature is also, it's a system. It's a system where everything connects. And one thing that we have found as we have become stronger as sort of the human race is that we have impacts on this system. We have found that when we have accidentally overhunted certain animals and they've dropped out, that creates an imbalance. And so another animal might rise up and become even stronger because the other animal that was maybe hunting it is now gone. And so the system is constantly trying to balance itself. And we can think about our relationship and even AI's relationship to the living things, to the physical environment, to the system. And each one we might come up with sort of a different answer. Maybe for living things, we can use AI to better help them. But for the physical environment, maybe it's more about controlling and understanding and predicting things that will happen. And then the systems themselves, well, they're just things that AI can see and measure that we cannot do with our five senses alone. And we're going to talk more about that difference between human and AI in just a moment. But this should give us a good way to think about when we're answering the question and being like, okay, so nature is what again? We can remember living things. The environment itself, the shape of the land that the water and the land itself makes, and the systems, the relationship that animals have that are connected, the relationship that the water and the environment and all the living things have that are connected. All right, so let's move to our next topic. And that is how nature can be different. What? So you're saying that it's the same nature? When I see a tree and you see a tree, we both see the same tree, right? When I'm looking at the ocean and an AI robot is looking at the ocean, we are looking at the same ocean, so it's the same nature, right? Yes, and also no. So the way that we take in information between people and the way that a robot might is going to be very different. There are going to be some things the same, but it's going to be the way in which we can gather the information is different. The way that we can understand the information can be different. So we'll talk about how for humans there's feeling involved in nature when we see things, when we remember. But there's also our senses, as I mentioned earlier. It's the smell of pine needles, the sound of a bird singing. So, when we think of these things, we generally have these maybe sometimes good feelings about it or sometimes bad feelings about it. And that those feelings can affect what we see. I can look out at the ocean and maybe feel very small, and how the ocean itself is dangerous, and I can be sort of scared of that, and that image will be different in my mind than what AI sees. Because what AI is going to see is going to be a collection of data. It's going to be information. It's going to be how wide the water it's seeing, maybe how deep the water it is it's seeing, how many waves per second are coming onto the shore. And all of that is not going to have the feeling of this is too much, this is too big, or how small am I compared to it. It's just going to be information things that it knows will be useful later on to predict what maybe will happen later, or to understand the, like I mentioned, the connection, the relationships of the things that rely on the ocean. It might be able to notice birds in the distance that I can't see, and what those birds are doing and why it's important for them to be out in the ocean. So things like trees and mountains and rivers, and like I said, the ocean are things to be analyzed, are things to be it's not quite numbers like ones and zeros, but it's in itself that data that it's going to be looking at, that I'm not going to see, that I could never be able to see when I'm looking at something that is a part of nature. So, to make it brief, the way that we see nature is different. Not that the nature itself is different, because, like I said, I'm looking at a tree, a robot's looking at a tree, we're both looking at the same tree. But that tree is going to mean something different to each of us, and that meaning is what we want to focus on. So again, in brief, with people, when we are recalling information, when we're thinking about nature, it comes from our five senses: our seeing, our sight, our sense of smell, our hearing, our even sense of taste, because as we know, fruits and vegetables and much of our food comes from nature. And last but not least, our ability to feel nature with our skin, to feel the roughness of a tree, to feel the softness of a flower petal, these sorts of things, which all have, which goes to our next point, they're emotionally charged. And because of that, they can be imperfect. We as people tend to remember things that are more traumatic. We are more likely to remember something really dangerous that might have happened to us than we are to remember something that was just a pleasant walk out in nature. But if suddenly a skunk were to come out, we're more likely to remember more details of that situation. And that's going to be something that AI doesn't do. We are going to remember that information because it helped us to survive in the past. It helped us when we didn't have society and we were living out in nature, that if there was something dangerous, we really needed to remember as much information as possible so that that situation didn't happen again. We could avoid it or possibly even change how we reacted in the future. And because of that, and the limitations of our own mind, when we are remembering things, we are actually recalling imperfect data. Our brain kind of fills in the gaps. We aren't actually remembering everything. We're assuming to remember a lot. And then next, what also kind of changes our view of nature can be cultural. And by that I mean the way that we feel about nature and what we think is important and not important can come from the culture that we live. A very good example of this is in Greek culture. The symbol of seeing an owl. Owls are representative of Athena, and so owls are supposed to be representation of this really smart, intelligent, wise creature. But to some Native Americans, some of their tribes believe that if you see an owl, that is a bad sign. That means that bad luck is going to happen to you or your family. So seeing an owl would be the last thing that you want to do. And if you did see one, that means you need to change, what you're going to do that day to prevent that bad thing from happening. But for the Greeks, seeing an owl is like being blessed by Athena. You would, oh, she's visiting me, she's watching over me, she sent this sort of, animal that represents her. And I mean, for the ancient Greeks, they might have believed it actually was her kind of checking in on them. So those are going to impact how we see nature. We are going to do different things involving that. Maybe the Native American might try to chase it away so that it chases away the bad luck, or the ancient Greek might offer it like a mouse for it to eat as a blessing to be put on them. But all of those are going to be cultural things that impact how we see nature. But AI isn't going to have any of that. Like, it might have some information about that, but it's not going to apply that information to how it's seeing things. It's going to mostly use it for what we'd call, and I've said it before, data analysis. And what that just means is it takes the information and then it is going to analyze it for the purpose of why is it taking in this information. Is it taking in information to find the pattern? Like I mentioned earlier, the number of waves that are hitting the shore, is that going to, is its goal going to be to help ships that are out in the ocean get to land? Then it wants to identify those patterns. It's going to analyze the data for that. And it's going to be able to do it much better than what people can. It's going to quantify relationships. I know this is kind of an odd, maybe even difficult thing, but I talked about relationships earlier. What we mean by quantify relationships is how important is this tree to a snail? How important is this tree to a bird? How important is this tree to other trees? It's going to be much better at seeing how often things interact with that tree. It is going to be much better at understanding maybe the reasons why the tree is visited. It is going to be able to quantify those relationships. How important is this to other things in nature? And I mean, it might even be able to do that with how important are these things in nature to people, to humans. And then, here's the big one. Identifies objective truths. So, objective just means it's not an opinion. So, we could say, this tree is beautiful. That's subjective. That's an opinion. Somebody might look at that tree and think that that's the ugliest tree that they've ever seen. But objective truth would be how many leaves are on this tree at this time? How quickly did this tree grow? Objective just means that these are things that no one has an opinion on. Maybe sometimes they could be considered mathematical truths. Even though they don't always involve math. It's just something that is true without question, without opinion involved. And AI is much better at getting those kind of truths, or finding them anyway. Okay, and if you're seeing the stuff that I have down here, these are just addressing the questions in our writings.